The woman's screams echoed through the church as dawn broke over Petaluma, California, shattering the quiet morning of September 1882. But by the time the midwife emerged with blood-stained hands and a sorrowful expression, those screams had fallen silent forever. Father Michael stood in the doorway of the small adobe church, his weathered hands clasped in prayer, as he watched the midwife wrap a squalling infant in a clean white cloth. The mother had been a stranger, a young woman who had stumbled into town 3 days prior, her belly swollen and her eyes haunted by secrets she would never share. She had collapsed on the church steps, going into labor before anyone could even learn her name. Now she was gone, and the baby girl she left behind wailed with the fury of the abandoned. "What will become of her?" the midwife asked, her voice heavy with concern as she handed the infant to the priest. Father Michael looked down at the tiny face, red and scrunched with displeasure, and felt his heart constrict. "I will care for her until we can find a suitable home. Perhaps one of the families in town will take her in." But 3 days passed, then a week, and no one came forward. The drought had been hard on Petaluma that year, and most families could barely feed their own children, let alone take in an orphan with no name and no history. The baby remained in a makeshift crib in the church rectory, tended by Father Michael and a rotating cast of charitable women from the congregation who took pity on the motherless child. It was on a Sunday morning, 2 weeks after the infant's arrival, that Lucas Crawford rode into town. His horse was lathered with sweat, its flanks heaving from the long ride through the California valley. Lucas himself looked no better. Dust coated his broad shoulders, his dark hair hung past his collar in desperate need of a trim, and his jaw was covered in a week's worth of stubble. He was 26 years old, though the hardness in his blue eyes made him seem older. He had been working a cattle drive up from the southern ranges, and this was his first stop in civilization in nearly 2 months. All Lucas wanted was a hot meal, a bath, and maybe a bottle of whiskey to wash away the taste of trail dust. He tied his horse outside the general store and was about to head inside when he heard a baby crying. The sound was coming from the direction of the small Catholic church at the end of the dirt road, and something about the desperate quality of those cries made him pause. Lucas had never been a particularly religious man. His mother had dragged him to church every Sunday when he was a boy, before she died of consumption when he was 12. After that, his father had turned to drink, and Lucas had learned quickly that prayers went unanswered more often than not. Still, his feet carried him toward the church, drawn by that plaintive wailing. Father Michael was pacing the front steps of the church, bouncing the screaming infant in his arms with the awkward desperation of a man unaccustomed to children. He looked exhausted, his eyes rimmed with dark circles, his cassock stained with what appeared to be milk. "Father!" Lucas called out, removing his hat as he approached. "Is everything all right?" The priest looked up, and relief flooded his features at the sight of another human being. "Oh, my son, I am at my wit's end. This poor child has been crying for hours, and nothing I do seems to comfort her. Mrs. Henderson usually comes by to help, but she is ill with a fever, and I fear I am not equipped for this task." Lucas stepped closer, peering at the bundle in the priest's arms. The baby's face was bright red, her tiny fists waving in the air as she screamed her displeasure. Something stirred in Lucas's chest, an unfamiliar sensation that he could not quite name. "May I?" he found himself asking, extending his arms. Father Michael did not hesitate, practically thrusting the infant into Lucas's care. The moment Lucas cradled her against his chest, adjusting her weight with surprising gentleness for a man with such calloused hands, the baby's cries began to subside. She hiccuped, her eyes a startling shade of green opening wide to stare up at him. "Well, I will be," Father Michael breathed. "She has been crying since dawn, and the moment you hold her, she quiets." Lucas looked down at the tiny creature in his arms, and something profound shifted in his world. He had held many things in his life: reins, rifles, ropes, but never something so small and fragile and utterly dependent. The baby's hand found his finger and grasped it with surprising strength, and Lucas felt his heart crack open in a way it had not since his mother's death. "Who is she?" he asked, his voice rougher than he intended. Father Michael sighed, gesturing for Lucas to follow him into the cool interior of the church. Inside, out of the harsh morning sun, the priest told him the story: the dying mother, the abandoned child, the town's inability to take her in. "I have been praying for guidance," Father Michael admitted, sinking onto a wooden pew. "I cannot care for her properly, not alone, and I fear what will become of her if we must send her to the orphanage in San Francisco. Those places are overcrowded and underfunded. This child deserves better." Lucas sat down beside him, still holding the baby, who now dozed peacefully in his arms. He knew he should hand her back, should walk away and continue with his plans for a meal and a bath and moving on to the next town, the next job. But he could not bring himself to let go. "What is her name?" he asked. "She has none. Her mother died before she could speak it." Lucas studied the baby's face, memorizing the curve of her cheek, the dark lashes resting against her skin, the tiny rosebud mouth. "Willow," he said suddenly. "She should be called Willow." Father Michael looked at him with surprise. "That is a beautiful name, but why Willow?" "Because they bend but do not break," Lucas said quietly. "And this little one is going to need that kind of strength." The priest was silent for a long moment, watching as Lucas cradled the infant with a tenderness that seemed at odds with his rough exterior. Then Father Michael smiled, a slow, knowing smile that made Lucas uncomfortable. "God sent you to me," the priest said softly. "I have been praying for an answer, and here you are." Lucas shook his head. "Father, I am just passing through. I am a cattleman, a drifter. I have no home, no family, no means to care for a child. And yet she quiets in your arms, and yet you gave her a name." Father Michael leaned forward, his eyes intense. "I have been a priest for 30 years, my son, and I have learned to recognize the hand of providence when I see it. You were meant to find her." "That is crazy talk," Lucas protested, but his arms tightened protectively around Willow. "I cannot take care of a baby. I sleep under the stars more often than not. I work 16-hour days. I am barely fit company for my horse, let alone an infant." "Then perhaps it is time to change your circumstances," Father Michael suggested gently. "Petaluma is a growing town. We need good men, strong men, willing to work hard and build a future. There is land available for homesteading, and the cattle ranches always need experienced hands who might eventually buy their own property." Lucas wanted to refuse. Every logical part of his brain screamed at him to hand the baby back and ride out of town before he did something foolish. But when he looked down at Willow, sleeping so trustingly in his arms, he saw his mother's face in his memory. He remembered how she had fought to keep him fed and clothed after his father's decline, how she had sacrificed everything for her child. This baby had no one to fight for her, no one to sacrifice for her. She would grow up in an institution, just another nameless orphan in a system that ground up the vulnerable and discarded them. "I do not know the first thing about raising a child," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "None of us do, until we must learn," Father Michael replied. "And you will not be alone. The women of the parish will help. I will help. Petaluma may be small, but we take care of our own." Lucas sat in that church for a long time, holding a baby who was not his, trying to make a decision that would alter the entire course of his life. The smart choice was to walk away. The safe choice was to return to the wandering life he knew, unburdened by responsibility or attachment. But as Willow stirred in his arms, making soft cooing sounds, Lucas realized he had already made his choice. It had been made the moment he first held her, the moment he gave her a name. "God sent you to me," he whispered, echoing Father Michael's words. Then he looked up at the priest with determination in his eyes. "I will need help. I will need a place to stay, work that pays enough to support us both, and someone to teach me how to care for her properly." Father Michael's face broke into a radiant smile. "Consider it done, my son. Consider it done." The next weeks passed in a blur of activity that left Lucas exhausted and bewildered in equal measure. Father Michael made good on his promise, connecting Lucas with Daniel Roberts, the owner of the largest cattle ranch outside Petaluma. Roberts was a gruff man in his 50s, with a practical streak a mile wide. But when he heard Lucas's story and saw the baby girl he carried in a sling against his chest, something softened in his weathered face. "I lost my own daughter to fever 10 years back," Roberts said, his voice gruff. "She was not much older than this little one. I will give you work, Crawford, and you can stay in the foreman's cottage. It has been empty since old Jim retired last spring. The pay is fair, and if you prove yourself, there might be opportunity to buy into a partnership down the line." Lucas accepted with gratitude, and suddenly he had a home, a small 2-room cottage with whitewashed walls and a fireplace. a rocking chair by the window, and a plot of land for a garden. It was more permanent than anywhere he had lived since leaving his father's house at 16. The women of Petaluma descended upon him with the force of a summer storm. Mrs. Henderson, recovered from her fever, showed up with a proper crib and stacks of cloth diapers. Young Sarah Mitchell, barely 20 herself, taught him how to prepare formula from milk and honey. Old Maria Gonzalez, whose own children were grown and scattered, came by twice a week to help with washing and to impart her considerable wisdom about infant care. "You must support her head, always," Maria instructed, her Spanish accent thick but her English clear. "Babies are strong, but they are also fragile. You must be gentle, but confident. They can sense fear." Lucas learned to change diapers, though the first few attempts were disasters that left both him and Willow covered in mess. He learned to warm milk to the right temperature, to recognize the different cries that meant hunger or discomfort, or simply a need to be held. He learned to function on 4 hours of broken sleep, to work a full day at the ranch, and then come home to care for an infant who depended on him for everything. It was the hardest thing he had ever done. It was also, he discovered, the most rewarding. Willow grew quickly, as babies do. By her 6th month, she was rolling over and babbling, her green eyes following Lucas everywhere he went. By her 1st birthday, she was pulling herself up on furniture and taking wobbly steps, her delighted laughter filling the cottage whenever Lucas came home from work. He threw her a birthday party that the whole town attended, and as he watched her smash her tiny fists into a cake that Mrs. Henderson had baked, Lucas realized he could no longer remember what his life had been like before her. The years passed with surprising speed. Lucas proved himself invaluable at the Roberts Ranch, his experience and work ethic earning him the respect of the other ranch hands and, more importantly, of Roberts himself. He saved his money carefully, planning for Willow's future, for a time when she might need schooling, or a dowry, or whatever young women required to make their way in the world. Willow grew into a bright, spirited child, with a quick smile and an adventurous nature that gave Lucas gray hairs before his 30th birthday. She learned to ride almost before she could walk properly, bouncing in front of Lucas on his saddle as he checked fence lines and rounded up stray cattle. She chattered constantly, asking endless questions about everything she saw. Why was the sky blue? Where did the cattle come from? What made the grass grow? How did birds know how to fly? Lucas answered every question as best he could, treasuring these moments of connection with the daughter of his heart, if not his blood, because that was what she had become, his daughter. The town had long since forgotten that they shared no blood relation. As far as Petaluma was concerned, Willow Crawford was Lucas Crawford's little girl, and that was the end of the discussion. It was just after Willow's 6th birthday when everything began to change. Lucas had been invited to Sunday dinner at the Roberts Ranch house, a regular occurrence that Willow looked forward to because Roberts' wife made the best apple pie in 3 counties. Lucas was helping clear the dishes when Roberts pulled him aside into the study. "I have a proposition for you, Crawford," the older man said, pouring them each a whiskey. "I am getting on in years, and my sons have no interest in ranching. They are both back east pursuing other opportunities. I need someone I can trust to help me run this operation, someone who might eventually be interested in buying me out when I am ready to retire." Lucas stared at him, the whiskey untouched in his hand. "Sir, I do not have the capital for something like that. Not now, perhaps, but we could work out terms, a partnership that gradually transitions to ownership. You have proven yourself 100 times over, Lucas. You are the best foreman I have ever had, and more than that, you understand what this land means, what it takes to maintain it. I would rather see it go to you than be sold off to some stranger who only sees dollar signs." It was an opportunity Lucas had never dared to dream of. Land ownership, real financial security, the ability to provide Willow with the kind of future she deserved. He wanted to accept on the spot, but years of caution made him careful. "Let me think on it," he said finally. "This is not a decision to make lightly." Roberts clapped him on the shoulder. "Take all the time you need. But Lucas, you have built a good life here. You have a home, a daughter who adores you, and the respect of this community. Do not be afraid to reach for more." That night, after Willow was asleep in her small bed, Lucas sat on the cottage porch and stared up at the stars. He thought about the man he had been 7 years ago, drifting from town to town with no roots and no purpose beyond the next paycheck. He thought about the moment he first held Willow, how something fundamental had shifted in his soul. She had saved him just as much as he had saved her. The sound of hoofbeats drew his attention. A rider was approaching in the darkness, which was unusual for this late hour. Lucas stood, his hand instinctively moving toward the rifle he kept by the door, but relaxed when he recognized Father Michael's elderly gelding. "Father," he called out, "is everything all right?" The priest dismounted with a grunt, his joints protesting the movement. He was older now, his hair completely white, but his eyes were still sharp. "I apologize for the late hour, Lucas, but there is a matter I must discuss with you. May I come in?" They sat at Lucas's rough-hewn table, cups of coffee between them. Father Michael seemed troubled, his fingers drumming against the scarred wood. "I received a letter today," the priest began, "from a law office in Sacramento. It concerns Willow." Lucas felt his blood run cold. "What about her?" "It seems that her mother's family has been searching for her. They only recently learned of her existence and her mother's death. They are making inquiries about the child their daughter left behind." Every protective instinct Lucas possessed roared to life. "Willow is mine. They abandoned her. They have no right to her now." "I understand your feelings, my son, but we must consider what is best for the child. This family has means, connections, the ability to provide her with opportunities that what? That I cannot?" Lucas stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I have given that little girl everything I have. I have raised her, loved her, been there for every laugh and every tear. She is my daughter." Father Michael raised a placating hand. "Sit down, Lucas. Please, I did not come here to upset you. I came here to warn you and to help you prepare. The law is complicated in these matters. You have no legal claim to Willow. If this family decides to pursue custody, you may have no grounds to fight them." Lucas sank back into his chair, his mind racing. The thought of losing Willow was unbearable, a physical pain in his chest. "What can I do? We need to establish your legal guardianship. I have been remiss in not pushing for this sooner, but I never imagined anyone would come looking for her after all these years. I can write letters, speak to people, but ultimately, if this family files a claim in court, you will need a lawyer and probably a significant amount of money for legal fees." Lucas thought of Roberts's offer, of the security and status that partnership would bring. "How much time do we have?" "I do not know. The letter was simply making inquiries. But, Lucas, there is something else you should know." Father Michael hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "The family is wealthy. Willow's mother was the daughter of a prominent merchant in Sacramento. They have resources that most people can only dream of. If they decide they want her, they will fight hard." After Father Michael left, Lucas did not sleep. He sat in the doorway of Willow's room, watching her sleep in the moonlight streaming through the window. She was so small, so innocent, unaware of the threat looming over their little family. Her dark hair spread across the pillow, and she clutched a rag doll that Mrs. Henderson had made for her last Christmas. "I will not let them take you," he whispered into the darkness. "I promise you that." The next morning, Lucas accepted Roberts's partnership offer. They drew up preliminary papers, establishing Lucas as part owner of the ranch with a path to full ownership over the next 10 years. It gave Lucas legal standing in the community, a tangible asset that demonstrated his ability to provide for Willow. It was not much, but it was something. Weeks passed with no further word from Sacramento, and Lucas began to hope that perhaps the family had decided not to pursue the matter. But his hope was shattered on a Tuesday afternoon in late October, when a fancy carriage rolled into town, drawn by 4 matched horses that probably cost more than everything Lucas owned. The woman who emerged from that carriage was dressed in the latest fashion, her traveling suit immaculate despite the dusty roads. She was perhaps 50 years old, her hair elegantly styled, her bearing that of someone accustomed to deference and respect. Behind her came a younger woman, equally well-dressed, and a man in an expensive suit carrying a leather satchel. Lucas was in town picking up supplies when he saw them, and his stomach dropped. He knew, with absolute certainty, why they were here. They went directly to Father Michael's church, and Lucas followed, his heart pounding. He arrived just as they were introducing themselves to the priest. "I am Eleanor Whitmore," the older woman was saying. "This is my daughter Catherine and our attorney, Mr. Stevens. We have come about the child you wrote about, the one born to my daughter Margaret 7 years ago." Father Michael looked past them to where Lucas stood in the doorway, and the priest's expression was pained. Mrs. Whitmore, perhaps we should discuss this matter privately. There is no need for privacy, Lucas said, stepping forward. If you are here about Willow, then I have every right to be part of this conversation. I am her father. Eleanor Whitmore turned to regard him, and her eyes were cold as they swept over his work-worn clothes and sun-weathered face. You are not her father, Mr. Crawford. You are a stranger who happened to take her in. My daughter was Willow's mother, which makes me her grandmother. The child belongs with her family. I am her family, Lucas said, fighting to keep his voice steady. I have raised her since she was 2 weeks old. I am the only parent she has ever known. A single man raising a child alone is hardly appropriate, Eleanor said dismissively. Willow deserves better than to grow up in a cattleman's cottage with no proper education, no social advantages, no future prospects beyond becoming some rancher's wife. We can give her everything: the best schools, introduction to society, opportunities for travel and culture. What can you give her? Love, Lucas said simply. I can give her love and a home where she is wanted, not just claimed because of blood. Catherine Whitmore spoke for the first time, her voice softer than her mother's. Mr. Crawford, please understand our position. My sister Margaret ran away from home 7 years ago after a falling out with our parents. We searched for her, but she did not want to be found. When we finally learned what had happened to her, that she had died giving birth, it broke our hearts. Willow is all we have left of Margaret. She is our flesh and blood. And where were you when Margaret needed you? Lucas challenged. She came to Petaluma alone, pregnant, with nowhere to turn. She died on church steps with strangers around her. If you cared so much, why did you not find her before it was too late? Eleanor's face hardened. You know nothing of our family's private matters. Margaret made choices that had consequences. But the child is innocent and deserves to know her heritage, to be raised as the granddaughter of the Whitmore family. Mr. Stevens, the lawyer, cleared his throat. Mr. Crawford, let us be frank. You have no legal standing here. Mrs. Whitmore is the child's closest living blood relative. Any court will rule in her favor. However, my client is willing to be generous. We are prepared to offer you compensation for your years of care, enough to set you up comfortably and allow you to continue your life without the burden of a child. She is not a burden, Lucas said through gritted teeth, and she is not for sale. Then we will see you in court, Eleanor said crisply. Come, Catherine, Mr. Stevens. We have wasted enough time here. We will file the necessary papers and return with the proper authorities. After they left, Lucas sank onto a pew, his head in his hands. Father Michael sat beside him, his expression sorrowful. What do I do? Lucas asked. How do I fight this? I do not know, my son. But we must try. That child belongs with you. Anyone with eyes can see that. Lucas hired a lawyer, a young man fresh from San Francisco, who was more enthusiasm than experience, but at least understood the stakes. The case was filed in the county court, and the hearing was set for 3 weeks hence. Those were the longest 3 weeks of Lucas's life. He tried to keep things normal for Willow, but she sensed something was wrong. She became clingy, following him everywhere, crying when he left for work in the mornings. Papa, are you sad? She asked him one evening as he tucked her into bed. Lucas smiled, though his heart was breaking. Just tired, sweetheart, but being with you always makes me feel better. I love you, Papa, she said, wrapping her small arms around his neck. I love you too, Willow girl, more than anything in this world. The day of the hearing arrived cold and gray, with rain threatening in the heavy clouds. The courtroom was packed with people from Petaluma, all there to support Lucas. Robert sat in the front row with his wife. Mrs. Henderson dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. Even some of the ranch hands had taken the day off to attend. The judge was a stern-faced man named Harrison, known for his no-nonsense approach to the law. He listened as both sides presented their arguments. Eleanor Whitmore's lawyer painted a picture of a young girl who deserved the advantages that only wealth and proper breeding could provide. He spoke of the Whitmore family's standing in Sacramento society, their connections, the doors that would open for Willow as their acknowledged grandchild. Lucas's lawyer did his best, calling character witnesses who spoke of Lucas's devotion to Willow, his integrity, his standing in the community. Father Michael testified about the day Lucas first held Willow, how the baby had quieted in his arms after hours of crying. Robert spoke about the partnership offer, about Lucas's prospects and stability. but Lucas could see the writing on the wall. The law favored blood relations, especially when those relations had money and influence. When the judge asked to speak to Willow privately, Lucas knew it was over. They brought Willow into the courtroom, and she looked tiny and frightened in the formal setting. She ran immediately to Lucas, burying her face against his shirt. "Willow," Judge Harrison said gently, "I need to ask you some questions. Can you be brave and talk to me?" Willow nodded, though she did not let go of Lucas's hand. "Do you see that lady there?" The judge pointed to Eleanor Whitmore. "She is your grandmother. She wants you to come live with her in a big house in Sacramento. Would you like that?" Willow looked at Eleanor, then back at the judge. "I want to stay with my papa." "I understand, child, but your papa is not really your papa. He just took care of you when you were a baby." "He is my papa," Willow insisted, her voice rising. "He takes care of me and reads me stories and makes me laugh when I'm sad. I do not know that lady. I want my papa." The judge sighed. "Sometimes what we want and what is best are different things. Mrs. Whitmore can give you a better life." "I have a life," Willow said, and tears began streaming down her face. "I have my papa and my home and my friends. Please do not take me away. Please." Lucas could not bear it any longer. He picked Willow up, holding her close as she sobbed against his shoulder. "Your Honor, I am begging you. Do not do this. She is my daughter in every way that matters. I will do anything, sacrifice anything, but please do not take her from me." Judge Harrison looked genuinely pained, but he shook his head. "Mr. Crawford, I have great sympathy for your position, but the law is clear. Mrs. Whitmore has the superior claim. However, I am not without mercy. I will grant you time to prepare Willow for the transition. You have 1 month to say your goodbyes and help her adjust to the idea of her new life. After that, custody will transfer to Mrs. Whitmore." The courtroom erupted in protests, but the judge's gavel came down with finality. It was done. The month that followed was a special kind of torture. Lucas tried to make every moment count, knowing that their time together was running out. He took Willow riding every evening, showing her all his favorite places on the ranch. They had picnics by the creek and stayed up late watching the stars. He made her laugh with silly jokes and held her when she cried, which was often now that she understood what was coming. The whole town rallied around them. People brought food, offered prayers, shared their outrage at the injustice of it all. But none of it changed the inevitable. 2 days before Willow was scheduled to leave, Catherine Whitmore appeared at Lucas's door. He had not seen her since the hearing, and his first instinct was to slam the door in her face. But something in her expression made him pause. "Please," she said quietly. "I need to speak with you. Alone." Lucas led her away from the cottage, not wanting Willow to overhear whatever this woman had come to say. They walked toward the corral, where the horses grazed peacefully in the afternoon sun. "I owe you an apology," Catherine began. "I have been watching you with Willow over these past weeks. My mother hired someone to report on her living conditions, to ensure she was being properly cared for until the custody transfer. The reports I received told me what I saw for myself when I came to observe, a few days ago, you love her deeply, and she loves you. You are her father in every meaningful sense." "Then help me," Lucas pleaded. "Convince your mother to drop this. Let Willow stay where she belongs." Catherine shook her head sadly. "You do not understand. This is not really about Willow. This is about my mother's grief and guilt. She and Margaret fought terribly before my sister left home. Margaret was in love with a young man my parents deemed unsuitable, and they forbade her from seeing him. She ran away with him, or so we thought. We later learned he had abandoned her when she became pregnant. She was too proud or too hurt to come home. When Margaret died, my mother was devastated. She has convinced herself that by raising Willow in Margaret's place, she can somehow make amends. But it is not fair to Willow, or to me. No, it is not," Catherine agreed, "and that is why I came here. I cannot change what is going to happen, Mr. Crawford. The law is on my mother's side, and she will not be dissuaded. But I can promise you that I will look after Willow. I will make sure she is treated kindly, that she receives affection and not just material advantages. And I will tell her about you, about how much you loved her, so that she never forgets." It was small comfort, but it was something. Lucas looked at this woman, seeing perhaps an ally, or at least someone who might protect Willow from the worst of Eleanor Whitmore's cold ambitions. "Will you let me write to her?" he asked. "I cannot promise my mother will allow it, but I will try." And when Willow is older, when she can make her own choices, I will make sure she knows where to find you." They stood in silence for a moment, and then Catherine reached out and touched his arm gently. "For what it is worth, Mr. Crawford, I think my sister would be grateful to you. You gave her daughter a gift she could not a father's love." The day Willow was supposed to leave dawned bright and clear, as if the world was mocking their sorrow. Lucas had barely slept, spending most of the night sitting in Willow's room, watching her sleep and memorizing every detail of her face. He made her favorite breakfast flapjacks with honey, but neither of them could eat much. They sat at the table, picking at their food, the weight of the approaching goodbye crushing them both. "Papa," Willow said finally, her voice small, "do I have to go?" Lucas wanted to lie, to tell her it would be all right, to make promises he could not keep, but she deserved better than false hope. "Yes, sweetheart, you have to go. But I do not want to. I want to stay here with you. I know, baby girl, I know." He pulled her onto his lap, holding her close. "But sometimes we do not get what we want. Sometimes life is not fair. Will you forget me?" The question broke his heart. "Never? Not if I live to be 100 years old. You are my daughter, Willow, and nothing will ever change that. Not distance, not time, not anything." They clung to each other as the morning wore on, and when the carriage finally appeared on the road, Lucas thought he might actually die from the pain of it. The whole town had gathered to say goodbye. Father Michael was there, and Roberts, and Mrs. Henderson, and Maria, and so many others who had become part of their lives. Eleanor Whitmore emerged from the carriage, her face impassive. Catherine followed, her eyes already glistening with unshed tears. "It is time," Eleanor said simply. Lucas knelt down to Willow's level, cupping her face in his hands. "You are the bravest, smartest, most wonderful little girl in the world. You remember that? You hear me? And you remember that your papa loves you with all his heart." "I love you too, Papa," Willow sobbed. "I love you so much." They embraced one final time, and then Catherine gently took Willow's hand, leading her toward the carriage. Willow looked back over her shoulder, her face streaked with tears, reaching for Lucas even as she was pulled away. "Papa! Papa, please!" Lucas took a step forward, every instinct screaming at him to grab her and run, to take her and disappear into the wilderness where no court order could find them. But Roberts's hand on his shoulder stopped him. "You cannot," the older man said quietly. "They will hunt you down, and it will only be worse for her." So Lucas stood there, his hands clenched into fists, his vision blurred with tears, as the love of his life was loaded into a carriage and driven away. He stood there long after the dust had settled, long after the crowd had dispersed with murmured condolences, long after the sun had climbed high in the sky. He stood there until Father Michael finally led him back to the cottage, to the empty rooms that still smelled of Willow's soap and sunshine, to the unbearable silence of a house that had lost its heart. The weeks that followed were the darkest of Lucas's life. He threw himself into work, laboring from before dawn until well after dark, exhausting himself physically in an attempt to quiet the ache in his soul. Roberts tried to talk to him, to pull him back from the edge of whatever abyss he was approaching. But Lucas could not hear him. Nothing mattered without Willow. He stopped going to town. He stopped attending church. He stopped participating in the life of the community that had once embraced him. He became a ghost of himself, going through the motions of existence without truly living. It was Roberts who finally shook him out of his despair, cornering him in the barn one evening, 3 months after Willow had left. "Enough," the older man said firmly. "I have given you time to grieve, but this has to stop. You are destroying yourself, and it is not honoring that little girl's memory." "She is not dead," Lucas said dully. "No, but you are acting like she is. And what happens if she does come back someday, Lucas? What happens if Catherine keeps her word and tells Willow where to find you when she is grown? Do you want her to find this broken shell of a man? Or do you want her to see the father she remembers strong, capable, someone she can be proud of?" The words cut through Lucas's fog of grief. Roberts was right. He had made Willow a promise to never forget her, but he had also promised to be someone she could look up to, someone worthy of her love. "I do not know how to move forward," Lucas admitted. "One day at a time," Roberts said. "You get up, you do the work, you let the people who care about you help carry this burden, and you hold on to hope, even when it seems impossible." So Lucas tried. It was the hardest thing he had ever done, harder even than letting Willow go, because at least that had been a single moment of anguish. This was choosing to keep living every single day despite the pain. But he did it. For Willow's sake, he did it. Months turned into a year, then 2. Lucas rebuilt his life piece by careful piece. He honored his partnership with Roberts, working to improve the ranch and increase its profitability. He reconnected with the community, returning to church on Sundays and accepting dinner invitations from friends. He even allowed himself moments of happiness, though guilt always followed swiftly behind. He never heard from Willow. He sent letters to the Whitmore address in Sacramento, but they all went unanswered. He did not know if they were intercepted by Eleanor, or if Willow simply had no interest in maintaining contact with her old life. The not knowing was its own special torture. Then, on a spring morning, nearly 3 years after Willow had been taken, a young woman stepped off the stagecoach in Petaluma. She was perhaps 19 or 20 years old, dressed in fine clothes but with an uncertain expression on her face as she looked around the unfamiliar town. She had dark hair pinned up in an elegant style, green eyes that seemed to search for something, and a way of standing weight on one hip, chin slightly lifted that made Lucas's heart stop when he saw her from across the street. It could not be. Willow would only be 10 years old. But those eyes, that way of tilting her head when she was puzzled, it was too familiar to be coincidence. The young woman approached the first person she saw, which happened to be Mrs. Henderson outside the general store. Lucas was too far away to hear what was said, but he saw Mrs. Henderson's face light up with shock and joy. She pointed directly at Lucas, and the young woman turned. Their eyes met across the dusty street, and time seemed to stop. Then the young woman began walking toward him, slowly at first, then faster until she was running. Lucas met her halfway, and when they collided, he knew. "Papa?" she said, her voice breaking on the word. But it was not a child's voice. It was a woman's voice, mature and cultured, shaped by years of expensive education. Lucas pulled back, staring at her in confusion and wonder. "Willow? But how? You are too old. It has only been 3 years." "No, Papa," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I am not Willow. I am Catherine Whitmore." Understanding dawned slowly. This was Catherine, the woman who had shown him kindness, who had promised to look after Willow. But why did she look so much like the baby he had held all those years ago, like the child he had raised? "I do not understand," he said. Catherine took his hand, leading him toward the church where they could speak privately. Inside the cool adobe walls, she told him the truth, the words spilling out in a rush as if she had been holding them in for far too long. "Margaret was not my sister," Catherine said. "She was my mother. Eleanor Whitmore is my grandmother, not Willow's. My mother ran away when she discovered she was pregnant with me, refusing to give me up or marry the man our grandmother chose for her. She lived as an unwed mother, working where she could, struggling to survive. She came to Petaluma when she learned she was pregnant again, hoping to start fresh somewhere no one knew her shame." Lucas sank onto a pew, his mind reeling. "Then Willow is your sister. Half-sister, actually. We had different fathers, but yes, she is my sister, and you raised her with such love and devotion that even hearing about it secondhand made me ache for what I never had. My grandmother raised me after my mother died, but there was no warmth, no affection. I was a duty, an obligation, a living reminder of my mother's disgrace. When we learned about Willow, my grandmother saw an opportunity to try again, to mold a child from infancy into the daughter she wanted Margaret to be. Where is she?" Lucas demanded. "Where is Willow?" "In Sacramento, being groomed to be the perfect society lady. She is miserable, Papa. She cries for you almost every night. I have tried to comfort her, tried to tell her about how much you loved her, but my grandmother forbids any mention of you. She has even threatened to send Willow away to boarding school in the East if she does not stop talking about her old life." Rage filled Lucas, hot and fierce. "That woman has no right." "No, she does not," Catherine agreed. "And that is why I came here. I am 22 years old, legally an adult. My grandmother has no power over me anymore, though she controls my inheritance until I marry a man she approves of. But I do not care about the money. I care about Willow, and I care about righting a terrible wrong." "What are you saying?" Catherine met his eyes, and he saw determination there, and something else, a desperate hope that mirrored his own. "I am saying that I want to help you get Willow back. I am saying that I have been researching the law, talking to lawyers without my grandmother's knowledge. You have no legal standing as a single man, but if you were married, if you had a wife who could help care for Willow, it would strengthen your case considerably. We could file for custody again, petition the court to reconsider based on new circumstances. Lucas's heart was pounding. I have no wife. I have not so much as looked at a woman since the day I found Willow on those church steps. I know, Catherine said softly, but you could have a wife if you wanted one. If you were willing to consider a marriage of convenience, a partnership for Willow's sake. The suggestion hung in the air between them, audacious and impossible, and somehow right. Lucas studied Catherine's face, seeing not just the resemblance to Willow, but also the intelligence and compassion that had led her to make this incredible offer. You would marry me, a man you barely know, a cattleman with no breeding or social standing, just to help your sister? I would marry you to save Willow from the cold, loveless life I endured, Catherine said firmly. I would marry you because I have seen the evidence of your love in every person I have spoken to in this town today, in the way they talk about you and Willow with such warmth and admiration. I would marry you because you are a good man, Lucas Crawford, and good men are rare in my world. But what about love? Lucas asked. What about your own happiness, your own future? Love? Catherine laughed, but it was a bitter sound. Love is a fairy tale my grandmother beat out of me long ago. As for happiness, I have learned not to expect it, but I can still hope for purpose, for meaning, for the satisfaction of doing something worthwhile with my life, helping you reunite with Willow, helping her escape the fate my grandmother has planned. That would be worthwhile. Lucas stood and paced the church, his mind spinning with possibilities and problems. It was insane. It was desperate. It might not even work, but it was a chance, a real chance, to get Willow back. And more than that, it was a chance to save Catherine from whatever miserable existence awaited her in Sacramento. If we do this, he said slowly, it would not be a marriage in name only, not forever anyway. This is a small town, Catherine. People would expect us to live as man and wife, to share a home, a bed. Eventually, they would expect children. Could you accept that? Catherine met his gaze steadily. I have spent my whole life being molded and controlled by my grandmother, preparing to be sold off to whatever husband she deemed appropriate. At least with you, I know you are a decent man. At least with you, I would have some say in my own life. Yes, Lucas, I could accept that. It was the most unromantic proposal imaginable, and yet there was something profound in it, something honest and real. They were two damaged people, coming together not out of passion, but out of shared purpose, offering each other partnership and respect and the chance at redemption. Then I accept, Lucas said. And Catherine, I promise you this, I may not be able to offer you the love story you might have dreamed of as a girl, but I will treat you with kindness and respect. I will be a faithful husband, and I will do everything in my power to make you happy. Catherine smiled, and it transformed her face, making her look younger and more hopeful. That is more than I ever dared to expect. Thank you, Lucas. They were married 3 days later by Father Michael, who was so overjoyed at the turn of events that he could barely contain his smiles. The whole town attended, showering them with congratulations and gifts and well wishes. Roberts gave Catherine away, having taken an immediate liking to the young woman, who reminded him so much of his own lost daughter. The wedding night was awkward, as such things often are between strangers. They lay in Lucas's bed in the cottage that had once been filled with Willow's laughter, both carefully keeping to their own sides. This is strange, Catherine said into the darkness. Yes, Lucas agreed, but we will figure it out. We just need time. Do you think we can really get her back? We have to try. That is all we can do. Try. Catherine reached out in the darkness, finding his hand. Thank you for giving me this chance. Thank you for letting me be part of your fight. Lucas squeezed her hand gently. Thank you for coming back for her, for not forgetting. They filed the new custody petition within a week, citing changed circumstances, Lucas's marriage, and improved financial position as a ranch partner, Catherine's willingness to testify about conditions in the Whitmore household. Their lawyer was cautiously optimistic, but he warned them that it would be an uphill battle. Eleanor Whitmore fought them with everything she had. She hired expensive lawyers who painted Catherine as an ungrateful child, poisoned against her own grandmother by a manipulative fortune hunter. They argued that Lucas had coerced Catherine into marriage, that the whole thing was a scheme to get money and control over Willow's eventual inheritance. The case dragged on for months, with depositions and hearings and endless legal maneuvering. Lucas and Catherine developed a routine, a partnership that was slowly becoming something more like friendship. Catherine worked alongside him on the ranch, learning to ride properly and helping with bookkeeping. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch and talk, sharing stories from their vastly different lives, finding common ground in unexpected places. "I never imagined I could be content in a place like this," Catherine admitted one night as they watched the sunset paint the sky orange and gold. "My grandmother always said that anywhere outside the city was barbaric, fit only for peasants and savages. But there is a peace here, a simplicity that I find appealing." "It is a hard life," Lucas said, "but it is an honest one. You know where you stand, what you have worked for. It matters." "Yes," Catherine agreed, "it matters." As the months passed, Lucas began to notice changes in himself. He found himself looking forward to seeing Catherine at the end of the day, to sharing meals with her, to hearing her laugh at something amusing one of the ranch hands had said. She was intelligent and capable, with a dry wit that caught him off guard and made him smile despite himself. She was also kind, going out of her way to help the other women in town, to make friends and build a life in Petaluma. One evening, about 6 months into their marriage, Lucas came home to find Catherine in the kitchen, her face flushed from the heat of the stove as she prepared dinner. Her hair had come loose from its pins, curling around her face, and she was humming softly to herself. She looked beautiful and domestic, and utterly right standing there, and Lucas felt something shift in his chest. "Let me help you with that," he said, moving to take the heavy pot she was lifting. Their hands touched on the handle, and Catherine looked up at him. For a moment, they stood frozen, mere inches apart, and Lucas saw his own confusion reflected in her eyes. Then Catherine smiled, a soft, wondering smile, and Lucas realized he was falling in love with his wife. It was not the wild, passionate love of storybooks. It was quieter, deeper, built on a foundation of respect and shared purpose and genuine liking. But it was real, and it was growing stronger every day. That night, for the first time, Lucas crossed the invisible line down the middle of their bed. Catherine welcomed him with a nervousness that matched his own, and when they came together, it was with tenderness and care, two lonely people finding comfort and connection in each other. Afterwards, Catherine lay with her head on Lucas's chest, listening to his heartbeat. "I did not expect this," she said softly. "Neither did I," Lucas admitted, "but I am not sorry." "Neither am I." The custody hearing was finally scheduled for late autumn, nearly a year after Catherine had first appeared in Petaluma. Lucas and Catherine traveled to Sacramento together, their hands clasped tightly as they faced an uncertain future. The courtroom was imposing, far more formal than the county courthouse where Lucas had lost Willow the first time. Judge Morrison was a stern woman in her 50s, known for her sharp mind and no-nonsense approach. She listened carefully as both sides presented their arguments. Eleanor Whitmore's lawyers painted a picture of a child thriving in a wealthy household, receiving the best education and opportunities. They brought in teachers who testified to Willow's academic achievements, music instructors who praised her piano playing, etiquette coaches who declared her a model student. But then Catherine took the stand, and everything changed. "Tell me about the child's emotional state," the judge asked. Catherine did not hesitate. "Willow is deeply unhappy, Your Honor. She is well fed and well educated, but she is not loved. My grandmother sees her as a project, not a person. Willow is not allowed to play freely or make friends outside approved social circles. She is punished for any mention of her father or her life in Petaluma. She cries herself to sleep most nights, and I have found her more than once with packed bags, planning to run away." "These are serious allegations," Judge Morrison said. "Do you have any proof?" Catherine produced a journal, Willow's own words written in a child's careful handwriting. Lucas's lawyer read selected passages aloud, and there was not a dry eye in the courtroom by the time he finished. Willow wrote of missing her papa, of wanting to go home, of feeling trapped and alone despite being surrounded by luxury. Then Willow herself was brought in, and Lucas saw her for the first time in 4 years. She was 10 now, taller and more mature, but still unmistakably his little girl. When she saw him, she let out a cry and tried to run to him, but Eleanor's lawyers held her back. "Willow, Judge Morrison said gently. I need you to answer some questions honestly. Are you happy living with your grandmother? Willow shook her head, tears streaming down her face. Can you tell me why? Because she is not my family, Willow said, her voice shaking but clear. My papa is my family, and Catherine. They love me. Grandmother just wants me to be perfect, but I cannot be perfect. I just want to go home. Where is home, child? Petaluma, Willow said without hesitation, with my papa and my new mama. She looked at Catherine when she said it, and Catherine gasped softly. They had not discussed what Willow should call her, had not wanted to presume or pressure the child. But Willow had made her own choice, claiming Catherine as her mother, just as she had once claimed Lucas as her father. Judge Morrison was quiet for a long time, studying the people before her, the cold, rigid grandmother, the weeping child, the man whose love was written plainly on his face, the young woman who had given up her inheritance and social standing for her sister's sake. I have reviewed all the evidence, the judge finally said. I have read the testimonies, studied the legal arguments, and considered what is in the best interest of this child. While I recognize that Mrs. Whitmore can provide material advantages, I am compelled to conclude that there is more to a child's welfare than money and social position. Willow Crawford needs love, stability, and the freedom to be a child. She needs to be with people who see her as a person, not a possession to be molded. Eleanor Whitmore stood. Your Honor, I must protest. Mrs. Whitmore, sit down, Judge Morrison said sharply. I am not finished. After careful consideration, I am awarding full custody of Willow Crawford to Lucas Crawford and his wife Catherine. Furthermore, I am issuing a restraining order prohibiting you from contacting the child without the express permission of her parents. You may not interfere in her life or attempt to manipulate her through financial means or any other method. Do I make myself clear? Eleanor's face went white with rage, but she could only nod stiffly. Mr. and Mrs. Crawford, you may take your daughter home. Lucas was moving before the judge finished speaking, crossing the courtroom to where Willow stood. She threw herself into his arms, and he caught her, holding her tightly as she sobbed against his shoulder. Papa, Papa, I missed you so much. I missed you too, baby girl, every single day, but you are coming home now. We are all going home. Catherine joined them, wrapping her arms around both of them, and Willow reached for her too, pulling her into their embrace. Thank you, Mama Catherine. Thank you for bringing me back to Papa. Always, Catherine whispered. I will always fight for you, Willow. You are my sister and my daughter, and I love you. They left Sacramento that very day, not wanting to spend another moment in that city that had tried to keep them apart. The train ride back to Petaluma was filled with joy and tears and endless questions. Willow wanted to know everything was her old room still the same. Were the horses still there? Did Mrs. Henderson still make the best pie? Was Father Michael still alive? Lucas and Catherine answered each question patiently, watching their daughter come back to life before their eyes. The haunted, careful child who had entered the courtroom was slowly disappearing, replaced by the spirited, curious girl Lucas remembered. When they finally arrived in Petaluma, it seemed like the entire town had turned out to welcome them home. There were streamers and a banner that read, "Welcome home, Willow," and enough food for a feast. Willow ran from person to person, hugging everyone, laughing and crying at the same time. Father Michael blessed them all, tears streaming down his weathered face. I always knew God would find a way, he said. I always knew this family would be reunited. That night, after the celebrations had ended and Willow was finally asleep in her old bed, Lucas and Catherine sat on the porch beneath the stars. We did it, Catherine said wonderingly. We actually did it. You did it, Lucas corrected. None of this would have been possible without you. You gave up everything for her, for us. I can never repay that. You do not need to repay it, Catherine said. This is my home now. You and Willow are my family. I have everything I need right here. Lucas took her hand, raising it to his lips. When we married, I told you I could not promise you love. I was wrong. I do love you, Catherine. Not because you helped me get Willow back, but because of who you are. Strong, brave, compassionate, beautiful, inside and out. I love you, and I thank God every day that you walked into my life. Catherine turned to him, her eyes shining with tears. I love you too, Lucas. I did not think I was capable of it, after everything my grandmother did to crush the softness out of me. But you and Willow taught me how to feel again, how to hope and dream and love. You gave me a family, a real family, and that is worth more than all the money in the world." They kissed beneath the stars, and it was sweet and tender and full of promise. They had come together out of desperation, but they had built something real and lasting. Their marriage was no longer a convenience or a strategy. It was a partnership, a love story written in sacrifice and determination, and the willingness to fight for what mattered most. The years that followed were good ones. Lucas's partnership with Roberts continued to flourish, and eventually, when Roberts retired to live with his son in San Francisco, Lucas and Catherine purchased the ranch outright. They worked side by side, building the operation into one of the most successful in the region. Willow grew into a remarkable young woman. She had her father's work ethic and her mother's intelligence, and she was beloved by everyone who knew her. She excelled in school, taught by a series of tutors that Lucas and Catherine hired to ensure she received a proper education without having to leave Petaluma. She could ride like the wind, rope cattle with the best of the ranch hands, and still play a beautiful piano piece when the occasion called for it. When Willow was 13, Catherine gave birth to a son they named Thomas Michael, honoring both Lucas's father and the priest who had brought them all together. 2 years later, a daughter arrived, Elizabeth Rose, completing their family. Willow proved to be a wonderful big sister, patient and loving with the younger children, teaching them all the things Lucas had once taught her. Eleanor Whitmore made one attempt to contact Willow when she turned 18, sending a letter offering to reinstate her as an heir if she would come to Sacramento for a visit. Willow read the letter once, then burned it in the fireplace. "I have no interest in her money or her world," Willow told her parents. "Everything I need, everything I love, is right here." She married at 21, a good man named James Porter, who worked for the railroad and treated her like the treasure she was. They built a house just down the road from the main ranch, close enough that Willow could visit every day, but far enough to have their own privacy. On Willow's wedding day, as Lucas walked her down the aisle of the church where he had first held her as an infant, he thought about the strange and winding path that had brought them to this moment. He thought about the scared young man he had been, ready to drift away from Petaluma forever until he heard a baby's cry. He thought about Catherine, who had given up her inheritance and her place in society for the sake of love and family. He thought about all the people who had helped them along the way, who had formed a community around them and supported them through joy and sorrow. "Papa," Willow whispered as they reached the altar, "thank you for finding me. Thank you for never giving up on us." "God sent you to me," Lucas replied, echoing the words he had spoken so long ago to a tiny infant who had quieted in his arms. "And I have been grateful every single day since." As Lucas placed Willow's hand in James's and stepped back to stand beside Catherine, he felt complete. His life had not turned out the way he had planned all those years ago, when he was a drifter with no roots and no purpose. It had turned out better. He had found love not once but twice, first with the abandoned baby, who had taught him what it meant to be a father, and then with the brave young woman who had become his partner in every sense of the word. That night, after the wedding celebrations had ended and the younger children were in bed, Lucas and Catherine sat on their porch, as they had done countless times before. The ranch was quiet, the stars brilliant overhead, and Catherine's head rested on Lucas's shoulder. "Do you ever regret it?" Lucas asked. "Giving up your old life for this one?" Catherine laughed softly. "Not for a single moment. That was not a life, Lucas. It was an existence, cold and empty and meaningless. This is a life messy and loud and full of love. I have you, I have Willow, I have Thomas and Elizabeth. I have purpose and joy and a place where I belong. How could I possibly regret that?" "I love you," Lucas said simply. "I love you too," Catherine replied, "now and always." As they sat together in the peaceful darkness, Lucas thought about all the twists and turns that had brought him to this moment. He had been a lonely drifter with no direction until the day he heard a baby crying in front of a church. That moment had changed everything, setting in motion a chain of events that had led to love and family and a life richer than anything he could have imagined. Willow had been abandoned on church steps, left to an uncertain fate, but in the end, she had not been abandoned at all. She had been loved fiercely and completely by a father who had chosen her, a mother who had sacrificed for her, and a community that had embraced her as one of their own. And that love had not only saved Willow, it had saved Lucas and Catherine too, giving them purpose and meaning and a family to call their own. The years continued to pass with the gentle rhythm of ranch life. Thomas grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved books as much as he loved horses, often found reading in the barn while the ranch hands worked around him. Elizabeth was more like Willow, spirited and adventurous, always getting into mischief and charming her way out of trouble with her father's blue eyes and her mother's quick wit. Willow and James had 3 children of their own, twin boys named Lucas and Michael, honoring both their grandfather and great-grandfather, and later a daughter they called Margaret after the grandmother who had died too young, reclaiming that name with love instead of bitterness. The ranch became a place filled with the sounds of children's laughter, a stark contrast to the silence Lucas had endured during those dark months after Willow had been taken. Father Michael lived to see all of this, passing away peacefully at the age of 83, with Willow holding one hand and Lucas holding the other. His last words were a prayer of thanksgiving for the family he had helped create, for the miracle he had witnessed that Sunday morning when a drifter had heard a baby's cry and stopped to help. As Lucas aged, silver threading through his dark hair and lines creasing his weathered face, he never lost his sense of wonder at the life he had built. Every morning when he woke with Catherine beside him, every evening when his children and grandchildren gathered around the dinner table, every Sunday when the whole family attended church together, he gave thanks for the day he had ridden into Petaluma with no purpose beyond the next meal and the next town. When Lucas was in his late 50s, a young couple arrived at the ranch seeking work. The man was rough around the edges, clearly down on his luck, but there was something earnest in his face that reminded Lucas of himself at that age. They had a baby with them, a little girl no more than 6 months old, and Lucas saw how carefully they protected her despite their obvious poverty. He hired them on the spot, offering them the foreman's cottage that had once been his and Catherine's first home. The couple was overwhelmed with gratitude, and Lucas saw tears in the young mother's eyes as she looked at the clean, safe space where they would live. "You do not know what this means to us," she said. "We have been struggling for so long, and I was afraid we would not be able to keep our daughter. This job, this home, it is an answer to prayer." Lucas looked at the baby in her arms, at the tiny face that reminded him so much of Willow all those years ago, and he smiled. Sometimes we get help when we need it most. Sometimes people show up at exactly the right moment. Pay it forward when you can, and the circle keeps going. That night, he told Catherine about the new family, about the feeling of things coming full circle. "You are still saving abandoned children," she teased gently, "even ones that come with their parents attached." "Maybe," Lucas agreed. "Or maybe I am just remembering what it felt like to be lost and alone, and doing what I wish someone had done for me all those years ago." "You were never truly alone," Catherine reminded him. "God sent Willow to you, but he also sent you to her. You saved each other." It was true. Willow had given Lucas purpose and direction when he had been drifting aimlessly. She had taught him to love unconditionally, to fight fiercely for what mattered, to build a life worth living, and in return, he had given her stability, security, and a father's unwavering devotion. When Lucas was 62, Roberts passed away peacefully in San Francisco, leaving a letter for Lucas that his son delivered personally. In it, the old rancher expressed his pride in what Lucas had accomplished, how he had transformed the ranch into something even greater than Roberts had imagined. But more than that, he wrote about how Lucas had proven that family was not just about blood, that love could be chosen and built and fought for. "You taught me that a man's worth is not measured by his circumstances, but by his choices," Roberts had written. "You chose to love when you could have walked away. You chose to fight when you could have surrendered. You chose to build when it would have been easier to drift. Those choices made all the difference, not just for you, but for everyone whose life you have touched. I am honored to have called you friend and partner." Lucas wept when he read those words, mourning the loss of the man who had given him a chance when he had nothing but a baby and a dream. Catherine held him as he grieved, understanding without words what Roberts had meant to him. As Lucas entered his 60s and then his 70s, he gradually stepped back from the day-to-day operations of the ranch, turning more responsibility over to Thomas, who had inherited his father's work ethic and his mother's business sense. Willow's oldest son, young Lucas, also came to work on the ranch, showing the same natural talent with horses and cattle that his grandfather possessed. Lucas spent his later years on the porch he loved, watching his grandchildren play in the yard, helping Elizabeth with her own children when she visited, and sitting beside Catherine as the sun set over the land they had built together. "We did all right, did we not?" he asked Catherine one evening, his hand finding hers as it had done thousands of times before. "We did more than all right," Catherine replied, her hair now silver, her face lined with age, but her eyes still bright with the intelligence and spirit that had first drawn him to her. "We built something beautiful. We created a family out of nothing, and that family will continue long after we are gone. Every child, every grandchild, every generation that comes after will carry a piece of what we started that day. I walked off the stagecoach in Petaluma. Do you ever think about what your life would have been like if you had stayed in Sacramento? If you had never come looking for Willow?" Catherine considered this, then shook her head. "That is not my life. This is my life, you, our children, this ranch, this town. Everything else was just a prelude, preparation for the moment when I would be brave enough to choose my own path. I regret nothing, Lucas, not a single moment." They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell, the lights of the main house twinkling in the distance, the sounds of family drifting across the yard. Lucas thought about the journey that had brought him here, from the lonely drifter who heard a baby crying to the patriarch of a sprawling family rooted in love and loyalty. "God sent you to me," he had told baby Willow all those years ago, and it had been true. But God had also sent Catherine and Father Michael and Roberts and every person who had helped them build this life. He had been part of a larger story, a web of connection and community that had caught him when he was falling and lifted him higher than he ever dreamed possible. Lucas Crawford lived to the age of 79, passing away peacefully in his sleep with Catherine beside him and his children and grandchildren gathered close. His funeral was attended by nearly the entire town of Petaluma, a testament to the impact he had made during his decades in the community. Willow spoke at the service, her voice strong despite her tears. "My father saved my life when I was 2 weeks old," she said. "But more than that, he showed me what love looks like, unconditional, fierce, unwavering. He taught me that family is not about blood, but about choice, about showing up every day and doing the work of loving each other through joy and hardship. He was not perfect, but he was present, and that made all the difference. I am who I am because Lucas Crawford chose to be my father, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to honor that choice by passing his lessons on to my own children and grandchildren." Catherine lived for 5 more years after Lucas's death, spending her days surrounded by family and her evenings on the porch they had shared for so many decades. She told stories about Lucas to anyone who would listen, keeping his memory alive not just in facts, but in the little details, how he had always checked on the horses before coming inside, how he hummed tunelessly when he was content, how he had cried at every one of their children's weddings, despite his attempts to hide it. When Catherine finally followed Lucas into whatever came next, she was laid to rest beside him in the cemetery next to the church where their story had begun. Their headstone was simple: Lucas Crawford, 1856-1935, and Catherine Crawford, 1860-1940. Beloved parents and grandparents, they chose love. The ranch continued through the generations, passed down through Thomas to his children and eventually to his grandchildren. Willow's descendants also remained in Petaluma, their branches of the family tree intertwining with others in the community, creating a network of connection that would have made Lucas proud. On the 100th anniversary of Lucas finding Willow on the church steps, the town of Petaluma held a celebration. By then, the people who had known Lucas and Catherine personally were mostly gone, but their story had become part of local legend, told and retold until it took on the quality of myth. The church installed a plaque commemorating that September morning in 1882, when a cowboy heard a baby crying and stopped to help, changing not just his own life, but the lives of generations yet unborn. Willow's great-granddaughter, a bright young woman also named Willow in honor of her ancestor, stood before the gathered crowd and told the story one more time. She spoke of abandonment and rescue, of love that chose to exist despite difficulty, of families built through determination rather than blood. She spoke of a man who had nothing but gave everything, and a woman who had everything but found meaning in giving it away. "Their story reminds us that we are all connected," young Willow said, "that a single act of kindness, a single choice to care when it would be easier to walk away, can echo through time in ways we cannot possibly imagine." My great-great-grandfather Lucas Crawford was not a perfect man, but he was a good man who made one critical choice to love. And that choice, that single decision made on a Sunday morning more than a century ago, created all of this. She gestured to the crowd, to the descendants of Lucas and Catherine who filled the church and spilled out onto the steps. We are his legacy. We are the proof that love matters, that choosing family over convenience matters, that showing up for each other matters. And we will carry that legacy forward, passing it to our own children and grandchildren, keeping alive the memory of the day a cowboy found an abandoned baby and said, "God sent you to me." The crowd applauded, many wiping away tears. And as the celebration continued into the evening, stories were shared and connections renewed. The ranch that Lucas and Catherine had built still stood, now expanded and modernized, but still bearing the mark of their vision and hard work. The cottage where they had raised Willow had been preserved as a sort of museum, filled with artifacts from their lives. Willow's childhood drawings, Catherine's journals, Lucas's old saddle and hat. Visitors came from all over to hear the story and walk the grounds where it had unfolded. The tale of Lucas Crawford and the baby he found on church steps had become more than just local history. It had become a parable about love and choice, about families created through determination rather than biology, about the ways in which we save each other. And on quiet evenings, when the wind blew across the California Valley and the sun set in brilliant colors over the ranch, some people claimed they could still sense the presence of Lucas and Catherine, still walking their land, still watching over the family they had built from nothing but love and stubborn determination. Their story had ended, as all stories must, but the legacy they created lived on. Every child who was chosen rather than born into their family, every person who fought for love against impossible odds, every individual who refused to give up on someone who needed them, they were all continuing what Lucas and Catherine had started on that September morning in 1882. The abandoned baby on the church steps had grown into a woman who raised children of their own. The cowboy who stopped to help when he could have ridden past had built not just a ranch, but a dynasty of love that would outlive him by generations. And the young woman who gave up her inheritance to fight for her sister had found something far more valuable than money. She had found purpose, family, and a love that lasted until her final breath. It was a story that deserved to be remembered, and in Petaluma it would be. Every September, on the anniversary of that fateful day, the bells of the old church would ring, calling the community together to remember and celebrate. They would gather on the very steps where Margaret had died giving birth, where a helpless infant had been left alone, where Lucas Crawford had first held the daughter who would change his life forever. And they would repeat the words that had started it all, the words that captured both the mystery and the certainty of what had transpired. "God sent you to me." Those 5 words contained everything: the wonder of unexpected connection, the recognition of divine providence, the commitment to love, even when logic suggested walking away. They were Lucas's words, spoken over a crying baby in a moment of pure instinct and feeling. But they became more than that. They became a mission statement for how to live, a reminder that sometimes the greatest blessings come disguised as burdens, that the people we save often end up saving us right back. The story of Lucas Crawford and Willow was complete, their lives fully lived, their legacy secure. The abandoned baby had been found, the cowboy had become a father, and together with Catherine, they had built something that transcended their individual stories. They had created family where none existed, had chosen love when it would have been easier to walk away, had fought for each other until their final breaths. And in doing so, they had proven something fundamental about the human spirit, that we are capable of extraordinary love, that family is what we make it, and that every life has the potential to touch countless others in ways we cannot begin to imagine. Lucas had been a drifter with no purpose until he stopped to investigate a baby's cry. Catherine had been a prisoner of her grandmother's ambitions until she chose to fight for her sister. Willow had been an abandoned infant with no future until a cowboy looked into her eyes and claimed her as his own. 3 broken, lost, abandoned people had found each other across time and circumstance, and in finding each other, they had found themselves. They had built a family that would endure for generations, a love story that would be told and retold until it became legend. And it had all started with 5 simple words, spoken in faith and hope and desperate prayer. "God sent you to me." Those words were true then, and they remain true through all the years that followed, through every challenge and triumph, through every loss and celebration. God had sent them to each other, and they had been wise enough, brave enough, and loving enough to recognize the gift they had been given. They had taken that gift and multiplied it, creating more love, more family, more life than any of them could have achieved alone. That was their legacy. That was their story. And it was a story with the happiest of endings, not because everything was perfect, but because they had chosen each other, fought for each other, and loved each other through everything life threw at them. They had created a family rooted in choice rather than obligation, in love rather than duty. And that family had flourished beyond anything they could have imagined. The abandoned baby became a beloved daughter, sister, mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother. The cowboy became a devoted father, husband, community leader, and patriarch. The society woman became a ranch wife, mother, and the heart of a family she had helped to save. Together, they had written a love story for the ages, one that would be remembered and celebrated long after they were gone. And every year, when the church bells rang on that September morning, their descendants would gather to give thanks for the day God had sent them to each other, and to recommit themselves to the legacy of love that Lucas Crawford, Catherine Crawford, and Willow Crawford had left behind. It was a legacy worth preserving, worth fighting for, worth passing on to future generations. Because in the end, love was all that mattered. Love was what had saved them, sustained them, and allowed them to build something beautiful from the ashes of abandonment and loss. Love was their triumph, their redemption, and their gift to the world. And so, the story ended as it had begun, with love, with family, and with the absolute certainty that God had sent them to each other for a reason. They had fulfilled that purpose beyond all expectations, and the world was better for it. Their names would fade with time, but their legacy would endure forever, woven into the fabric of Petaluma and the hearts of everyone who heard their story. Lucas Crawford, the cowboy who heard a baby crying and stopped to help, had left his mark on the world in the most profound way possible. He had loved and been loved in return, and that love had rippled outward in ever-widening circles, touching countless lives and creating a legacy that would outlast even the land he had worked so hard to build up. It was a life well lived, a story well told, and an ending that honored everything they had fought for. The abandoned had been claimed, the lost had been found, and love had triumphed over every obstacle placed in its path. That was their story, complete and whole, with nothing left unresolved, and that was exactly as it should be.